There. Okay, mute all. Okay, so hello. Welcome. So this is a shiur, a Torah learning that's coming on the 16th day of Tammuz. So the 16th day of Tammuz is very important because it's my son's birthday, Shimon Yisroel. But it's also the day before the 17th of Tammuz, which is an important date because it begins, the 17th of Tammuz begins a period that we call it Bein HaMetzerim, between the straits. So what does this mean, this time between the straits? So in Eicha, which is one of the songs, one of the holy songs that we read it on Tisha B'Av, it says, all of her pursuers who overtook her were within the straits. All of her pursuers who overtook her within the straits, talking about the enemies of Bnei Israel. So the sages explain to us that this refers to the days of affliction, the days between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. So we've been talking about Tammuz, how Tammuz is a month where we need to work on seeing things correctly. We said that Tammuz is connected to the tribe of Reuven, that when he was born, Leah said, Ru'u ben, look to see I am a son. But according to the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a mystical Sefer that some people say was written by Avraham Avinu, Ru'u ben, the idea each month has a task or a specific work to do. And the work of Tammuz is to see things correctly with the right perspective. So seeing things in Tammuz. So just before we move into the 3 weeks, I just want to say something that's very interesting about Tammuz. And I might have told it to you before, but I feel like it's worth saying again. So many of the months, the way that we call the months, the way that they're known on the calendars, Hebrew calendars, etc., are actually Babylonian names. So the month of Tammuz, Tammuz is actually a Babylonian name. Hebrew, the sign of it is the crab, the akriv, but the month is Tammuz. Now Tammuz was actually a cult, a Babylonian cult. And there's a verse in Yechezkel which says, and behold, the women were sitting there and they cried over Tammuz. So it's funny that we have the name of our month named after not just a word from the Babylonian culture, but it's actually was a cult. And the cult was, part of the service of the cult is that, and I think I've said this to you before, they would make plays, dramas, performances that were very melodramatic, and then the people would cry in front of these very tear-jerking, melodramatic plays, and part of the service of this cult god Tammuz would be this false crying, what my husband would call crocodile tears. Now that's very interesting that that's where the name of the month comes from, but in fact, we know that a lot of things about the month of Tammuz do happen to be connected to emotion and kind of drama. And when the spies came back from checking out Eretz Yisroel, it's around this time also. And they came back and they were crying over the fact that they couldn't go into the land, or they thought they couldn't, but in actual fact, they could have, but they chose to see things in such a way and then cry over their terrible misfortune that they had to stay in the desert for all that time. So there is that aspect of Tammuz, the month of Tammuz, which has this element of drama, and it's not always based on truth. That's the whole thing about it, that we see as we move from a gola consciousness, which is a consciousness of exile, to a consciousness of geula, which is the same word, just with an aleph put into the geula, we'll see that it's all about changing the perspective and the way we see things, that we think that things are very difficult, very much stacked against us, that we have all these obstacles, but in fact, it's just a way of seeing. How are we seeing things? And if we see things in the right perspective, a lot of those obstacles can really disappear. So the fast of 17th of Tammuz it's going to begin tomorrow morning when we wake up. It's a fast from sunrise to sunset. So as I've explained, the month gets its most potent kind of energy as it goes to 14, 15, 16, 17. The peak of the month is always the time when the month has its biggest manifestation of the energy of that month. So the 17th day of Tammuz is a fast. Now, it's a fast not just for one reason. It's a fast, the sages bring 5 separate reasons why it's a fast. So the first reason is that it was on the 17th of Tammuz that Moshe came down from Har Sinai, which was 40 days after the yidden got the Torah. 40 days later, Moshe is on Har Sinai, he comes back, he's a little bit delayed, the people think he's not coming back because of elements amongst them who were used to worshiping idols. Things get confused, they make the golden calf. Moshe comes down and sees them dancing around this calf, and the tablets are broken. So that's one reason why we fast. Another reason why we fast is that in the first Beis HaMikdash, now there's some opinions that the walls of Jerusalem were breached, leading to the destruction of both the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, which were destroyed on the 9th day of Av, which is next month. And according to some opinions, the walls around Jerusalem were both breached on the 17th day of Tammuz. So that's one opinion, that it was the 17th day when the walls were breached. Another opinion is that the walls were breached on the 9th, but by the time you get to the 17th, they no longer have the ability to offer sacrifices in the temple. They used to offer a daily sacrifice, a sheep every day they would offer. And now, if the walls were breached on the 9th, according to some opinions, or if it was more immediate, they couldn't offer their sacrifices. So there was a period where they were giving money to the people who had taken siege of the city, and they would lower down in a basket coins, gold coins, and then the Greeks and then later the Romans would put sheep and allow the Kohanim to pull up the sheep and offer them on the altar. But this is, according to some opinions, the date when the daily offering, which would be symbolic of the connection between people in the temple and God, and this beautiful interaction, and we giving our service from below, and Hashem is sending his blessings down from above. This came to an end on this day. Then that's the ending of the sacrifices and the walls. So that's possibly the ending of the sacrifices in the first temple. In the second temple, the walls being breached. And then another reason why we fast on this day is that we're going through a period right now of rioting. We know all about this Black Lives Matter. When people get angry, they do things, loot, steal, whatever. So in the times of the Romans, when there was Romans throwing their power around Jerusalem, so it's the time of the Roman procurator whose name was Cumanus, and there was rioting, and there was looting, and there was a whole lot of Jews were protesting something, and the Roman soldiers were viciously trying to put down their protesting. And one of the Roman soldiers took a Sefer Torah and set it alight and burned a Sefer Torah on this day. So it's Apostomus burned, the wicked Apostomus burned the Torah. So I actually read into it, and it's good to know that the Jews brought a court case in the Roman courts against the soldier who was actually punished and persecuted, thank God for doing this. But of course it was a terrible violation. And a fifth thing was that an idol was placed in the holy place of the Mishkan. And so that's like a whole lot of reasons why this time we, from now until the 9th of Av, which is when the temple actually gets destroyed, both temples, the first and the second, we lessen rejoicing, we don't have marriages, we don't listen to live music, we don't do dancing unless I guess it's part of your physical exercise. We don't go on pleasure trips, just fun pleasure for no purpose. We don't do haircuts or shave if we don't shave. Men don't shave their beards. We don't say the blessing on new clothing, shechianu, unless we presented with a special opportunity to go to a bris or a pidyon haben, and then their brachas allowed over there. And teachers and parents should be particularly mindful not to strike their children during this time, because it is a more sensitive time. So I'm just going to put this on pause. Okay, so this whole period with the destruction of the breaking of the luchot, the sin of the Jews with the golden calf, the sin with the spies trying to go into Eretz Yisroel, coming back with this bad report. All these things are all obstacles and stumbling blocks. It should have been a very quick and easy thing. They came out of Mitzrayim, they got the Torah, and then they were supposed to just go into Eretz Yisroel and enter into Eretz Yisroel to inhabit the land and do all the wonderful things that I'm going to tell you about in a few minutes about what the land is all about. But we know that there are all these stumbling blocks as a result of misperceiving situations, as I've said before, with the golden calf, misperceiving, misconstruing the length of Moshe's absence, with the tribes, misconstruing and misperceiving, you know, the great fruit that was grown there. One could have thought it was a tremendous gift, such a amazing, huge fruits, but they got terrified. They said, wow, the people there are giants and we just regular people, we can't eat these big fruits. Instead of seeing that the land had all this blessing inherent in it and it was just amazing, and Hashem had promised them that they could get into it, what happens is that they used all the information, they used it to feel bad about themselves. Remember, they said we were like locusts in their eyes and in our own eyes. They used the information and misconstrued events. So that's the golden calf, that's the spies, and then of course the tablets being broken. So all of these things are parallel, and all of these things can be part of one. We can look at them and see them as all metaphors in a way for our own path to come to a place of spirituality, to come to a place where we connected to Hashem and we have entered into the land, whether, and I'm using my little fingers for inverted commas, entering into the land, whether it's the real land or it's the conceptual idea of entering into Eretz Yisroel. These stumbling blocks that the Jewish people encountered over and over again, which ended up making a whole generation, the generation that came out of Egypt, actually had to end up staying in the land of, in the Midbar. They couldn't enter into the land at all. Why couldn't they enter? Hi, sorry, hello, welcome. Why couldn't they enter? They couldn't enter because of these sins, and they showed themselves that they were a generation that weren't fit to go into the land, and they had to basically die out in the desert. Even Moshe hitting the rock in last week's Parsha showed that his method of leadership really belonged to an old world, didn't belong to the new world. The new world would have been him speaking to the rock, different kind of mentality. So Moshe dies, Aaron dies, Miriam dies. None of them can actually go into the land. This is really very apropos for us because we are all trying to get to the land ourselves. Now, right now, it's actually, for some of us, it's a real thing. Like, can we get into the land? Can we fill out all those papers and deal with the Sochnut and the Aliyah department and Nefesh B'Nefesh? That's one level. On another level, it's every person's every person's struggle who's trying to have a mystical, spiritual experience is this experience of trying to get into the land of Israel, facing obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in the land of Israel is a spiritually live, vital experience of feeling connected to Hashem at all times and feeling Hashem is with us at all times. So in that vein, along those lines, I don't know if some of you have seen, I've been putting up on my YouTube channel and on the WhatsApp chat, little short videos, 10 or 15 minutes from Reb Nosson of Breslev. He's the main student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, and he has a book called Lekutei Halachot, a collection of explaining the laws, how to live from the Shulchan Aruch. And he starts off and he talks about how to get up in the morning. And how do you get up in the morning when you feel like you've made so many mistakes? Let's say you are, as a person, you're the personification of the Jewish nation, and you wake up in the morning and you think, oh my gosh, we did the sin of the golden calf. Oh my gosh, we caused Moshe to break the luchot. Oh my gosh, we elected spies that went into the land and they came back and they reported everything in such a twisted way. And instead of listening to Yehoshua and Kalev, we listened to the 10 spies who were not clear, and we didn't listen to the 10 spies who were clear. And we could think really badly of ourselves, and we could think of all the terrible things that we ourselves have done as individuals and as, people representing this Jewish nation. So Rabbi Nachman says, and Reb Nosson teaches based on Rabbi Nachman's teaching, that if you wake up in the morning and you can find the good point in yourself, that's going to not just help you serve Hashem in the right way, but that finding of the good point in yourself is actually going to bring the redemption closer. And he uses the idea of how the Jews said, and there's a reference to it in Shir Hashirim, when they say, we are black, our face, our appearance is black. What does it mean? It means we did this terrible sin of the golden calf. But really, Rabbi Nachman teaches that the Jews and a person and each individual person has to say, even though I did these things, I made these mistakes, I look for the Nakuda Tova, I look for the good point in myself, and then I strengthen that good point in myself, and by strengthening that good point in myself, I then am able to bring about the redemption. He speaks about the word shachor, I'm black, and then he twists it and he says shachar is the dawn. And I find the good in the darkness, and then I help to initiate the dawn of the new day coming. So that's a very beautiful idea. And it's very powerful because in this week's Parsha, apart from, it's called Pinchas, and there's a lot to say about Pinchas, but it's really about coming into the land. All these Parshiot that we are in, we're getting closer and closer and closer to the land, to the border of entering into Eretz Yisroel. And we really want to know, how can we enter into the land? How can we get past all of these mistakes, all of these misconceptions, all of these lack of clarity of the way we were seeing things? How can we get into the land? So in this week's Parsha, we see that the land of Israel is divided by lottery, and different portions of the land are given to all the different 12 tribes. And then we have the idea of the daughters of Salafchat. Salafchat was a man who passed away in the desert, and he didn't have any sons. And the way the land was divided up, the land was given to the sons of, according to the sons in the tribe. And Salafchat didn't have any sons, so the daughters were very upset. They said, what about us? So Moshe wasn't sure. Yes, what about them? Do they get land or not? He asks Hashem, and Hashem says, yes, they should get land. So we read about that in this week's Parsha, which is very beautiful. And we read about Yoshua, who becomes the successor to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's going to lead the people into Eretz Yisroel. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Eretz Yisroel, because this is the whole thing of what we're trying to do. We're trying to awaken the Eretz Yisroel within ourselves, in a way, awaken our right to earn or enter Eretz Yisroel. And what's that all about? So if we go back a little bit, so we know that the land was described as flowing with milk and honey. It's a beautiful thing that is taught, is that every country in the world is governed by a guardian angel, except for Eretz Yisroel. It's not guarded by a guardian angel, it's guarded by Hashem himself, by his divine providence. So that's like a beautiful thing right there. That's why people who are in Eretz Yisroel feel that the HP, the Hashgacha Pratis aspect, the Hashgacha Pratis means the divine guidance of God orchestrating each and every event in the world, is more pronounced there than in other places. So that's a amazing thing. And I think Shoshana's joined us, so that's very nice. So Eretz Yisroel is, instead of being guarded by or kind of managed by guardian angel, it's managed directly by Hashem himself. So that's a beautiful thing. And the specialness of the land is rooted in creation itself. Now, we know that Noah, after the flood, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. And Shem was gifted with the land of Israel. But what happened is that the Shem, Ham, and Yafes, these are the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. So Shem becomes Melchizedek, and from the descendants of Shem becomes Abraham, and who we are, the Jewish people. From Ham Ham had a son called Canaan, and Canaan ended up conquering and occupying Eretz Yisroel, but it was promised to Shem. So the descendants of Shem, being Abraham, had to reoccupy and reclaim and fight back to get Canaan back to get the land of Canaan, which was named after Canaan, who was a descendant of Ham. Our purpose is to get back this land from Canaan. So before I tell you about Kanan, I just want to tell you a little bit more. So going back to creation, it says Hashem created the world because of his compassion, and because of his compassion, that creation is meant to reveal God's compassion. The world was just a chaotic mush of forces and energy, and Hashem is compassionate to us, creates a world, creates a place in which he can give to us and relate to us. Just like Shabbos is an opportune time for us to experience godliness, so Eretz Yisroel is an opportune space for us to experience godliness, because godliness is hidden in the physical world. The way that God created the world, godliness is not just a free-for-all, it's not just completely available. We have to work for it, and certain spaces and places and certain times make it easier for us to connect to that godliness and access it. So Shabbos is an opportunity. We have less Yetzer Hara, we have an extra piece of our soul, so we can access godliness through Shabbos. And Eretz Yisroel, the godliness is less hidden there, so if we want to access godliness, we can do it in any place, but it's harder. When we're in Eretz Yisroel, it's easier. So, but Rabbi Nachman teaches that in order for us to earn or get into Eretz Yisroel, and this is for us personally, and it's also for the Jews who were trying to get there, we have to have faith. We need to affirm faith in Hashem, acknowledging God as creator. And when we acknowledge God as creator and that God created Eretz Yisroel for the yidden, that's our ticket really to getting in. So, so I just want to tell you a little bit about this idea of Kanan, because in getting into Eretz Yisroel, we have to defeat Kanan and the Canaanites, the Canaanites. So we constantly told that we have to defeat Kanan, we have to defeat Kanan. So who is Kanan? So it's interesting because Kanan represents the most hostile klipa, the most hostile shell that's going to conceal godliness in all the world. Even in Mitzrayim, the klipa wasn't as intense as the klipa around Kanan. And what does Kanan represent? Immorality and arrogance. Because they were immoral and idolaters, the Canaanites were given the task of concealing the sanctity of the land by filling it with depravity in order to maintain the balance of good and evil. So this is like a whole story, but when Hashem first created the world, there were sparks, there was this, there was that. I'm not going to go into it now, but basically Hashem wanted to create a balance of good and evil, and he put the Canaanites, they having all this sort of negative energy, and they holding Eretz Yisroel, and we have to go in and fight the good fight and break that klippa away so we can earn and deserve and claim and inhabit Eretz Yisroel. So Kanan has the klippa, it's the shell, the hard shell like around a walnut, and we have to be the nut breaker, the nut oak cracker to break off that klippa so we can go in and get Eretz Yisroel. What was Kanan involved with? Here's the list. Now, on one level, we can hear this list and feel like, ugh, disgusting. And on the other level, we'll hear the list and we'll say, wow, we're living in times like that now. So incest, bestiality, and homosexuality. That's what's on the list here. All of these abominations were done by the people before the yidden could come in. Canaan shares a root with the word hachna'ah, which is submission. What Canaan was supposed to do is submit itself to something bigger, and everything about Canaan is a lack of humility and a lack of, and too much arrogance. So they're completely not humble. They're very arrogant. And we are constantly told to destroy the Canaanites, to break down their altars, shatter their pillars, cut down their idol worship trees, burn their idols, and burn their statues. Now, again, it's very interesting to see what's going on in America right now when people who are opposing the status quo are trying to burn down the monuments, burn down the statues, burn down all these things. So that's what the Jews were told to do with everything that the Canaanites established. Don't act like the Canaanites. And Abraham tells Eliezer, don't take a girl for me from here where I'm living. I'm living amongst these Canaanites. Don't take a girl from here. That's the worst thing. And I just want to tell you one more thing about them, a couple more things. The word Canaan also refers to a merchant or a trader. And then there's a quote from Hosea, which is, Canaan, in his hand are weights of deceit. So there's an idea that they were deceitful in their trading as well. So this is who we're up against within ourselves. These elements of this negativity, this immorality, lack of faith, arrogance, and so this is what we need to defeat in order to earn our right to Eretz Yisroel. Now, just before I wrap up, and I'll stop for questions, it's interesting that in order to earn Eretz Yisrael, the descendants of Shem had to go into slavery and had to go into exile. And it says Ishmael and Esav didn't endure slavery, but slavery, that the time that we spent in Mitzrayim was a precondition for us inheriting the land. So that's kind of interesting, because Ishmael and Esav were also descendants of Abraham, which means they came from the line of Ham, of Shem, but they didn't end up paying their dues. They didn't have that crucible of Mitzrayim experience, and then they didn't get the Torah, and the Torah also is a precondition. It's this aspect of developing faith. We need faith. So what happened in Egypt is that we became slave to the Egyptian culture, and what we needed to do was to cast off not just the slave workers with their whips and telling us to build cities and all of that, like the way we imagine it in children's books. It's really that we accepted their authority, we accepted their worldview, we accepted a lot of things that were going on in the culture, and what we had to do was cast that off and come to an acceptance of Hashem. So I'm just going to pause now and see if anybody wants to comment. Okay, so usually I do the Hayom Yom at the beginning of the session, but today I did it at the end of the session. But actually, before I do the Hayom Yom, I just want to tell you a little bit more about one thing over here, that it's very interesting and curious that the way the land was divided was by lottery. That's very interesting that when they came into the land, so in this week's Parsha, Pinchas, Moshe is instructed on how the land is to be divided by lottery among the tribes and families of Israel. So before I speak about the lottery, I just realized that in terms of the name of the Parsha being Pinchas, and everything that we were talking about defeating the Canaanites, so Pinchas is the ultimate symbol of somebody who reacts to immorality. When he sees the prince from the tribe of Shimon, the prince from the tribe of Shimon was Zimri, and Zimri was with this Midianite princess and doing something immodest. So everything that I've been talking about, what we're supposed to do to acquire the land and defeat the values of Canaan and defeat the values of Canaan and oppose them. So he did this absolute heroic, the absolute heroic action of saying, I see immorality, I see something that is not good, it's not correct. We are an Am Segula. Now, an Am Segula means a specially chosen people that are chosen for this extraordinary relationship with Hashem, and this just does not belong here. So Pinchas acted with tremendous zeal and tremendous commitment to the values of what the Jewish people are supposed to be. Now, why was the prince of Shimon having illicit relations with the Midianite princess? Like, how did this come to be? So in last week's Parsha, I don't think we discussed it so much, but the Moabite king wanted to try and destroy the Jewish people, and he called upon Bilam, who was a magician really, and he was also a prophet. He spoke to Hashem. He had powers on par with the powers of Moshe, but in the negative, not the positive. And the king of Moab, Balak, wanted to curse the Jewish people, employed Bilam to curse them. But as you know, every time Bilam opened his mouth, instead of curses coming out, blessings came out. So then Bilam said, I'm not able to curse these people. Hashem is not allowing me to curse these people, but I have a good idea for you. If you can get your ladies to lure the Jewish men into illicit relationships, that's the way the people will fall, because their morality will fall. Hashem will get angry with them. He won't protect them anymore. That's your way in. And so I remember teaching this last year, that the woman, the Midianite woman and the Moabite woman, they would, they set up pop-up shops, like markets, and they would have beautiful girls manning the stores. And then the Jewish men would come in to buy things. And then the Jewish girls will say, well, actually, I have better stuff in the back. Do you want to come to the back to look at the cloth or, you know, the different stuff that I have in my store? And they would lure them into the back of their tents, and then they would be immodest with them, and then they would have relations with these Jewish men and get them to start worshiping their idols. So this fits in very, very well with the whole topic of the conversation of how to earn Eretz Yisroel, is to stand for something, to stand for our value system, to stand for what we believe in, to stand for our values and stand for our morals. And that when we see things, Jewish people, you know, being confused and led on the wrong path. So Pinchas acted like a zealot. He jumped up, he took a spear, he was like, you know, no one's doing anything, and he stabbed them, and he's actually given credit, and he's rewarded, and he becomes a Kohen, and he's given a blessing of peace, and he's given a lot of acknowledgement, even though one could say what he was doing was vicious and aggressive. But this is the bottom line: when you're compassionate to the people to whom you need to discipline, and when you're compassionate to the cruel, you'll end up, when you show compassion to the cruel, you'll end up being cruel to those who are compassionate. When you are tolerant of evil, then you'll end up, when you're tolerant of evil, that evil will end up being intolerant of you. You can't give in to people looting and stealing and saying it's an expression of their, you know, of their frustration. That's just not okay. People can't destroy and hurt and kill and shoot other people because they're frustrated. That's not okay. So Pinchas is rewarded for his act of zealotness, and he's granted a covenant of peace, and he becomes a Kohen. So that's a very important piece that ties everything together about the whole Parsha. And just the idea of the daughters of Tzalafchat. So just to conclude, I'm just going to read you the Hayom Yom from today. So the Baal Shem Tov teaches that Avas Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew, the Baal Shem Tov's Ahavas Yisrael, the way the Baal Shem Tov loved a fellow Jew was beyond imagination. The Maggid of Mezrich said, and that was his, the Maggid of Mezrich was his main student. The Maggid of Mezrich says, if only we could kiss a Sefer Torah with the same love that my master kissed the children when he took them to Cheder as a teacher's assistant. So this is a beautiful idea, and this also ties in with what Pinchas did, because Pinchas didn't do what he did because he didn't have Avos Yisrael. He did what he did because he did have Avos Yisrael. He loved his people so much that he didn't want them going astray. And he didn't want Shimon, this Shimonite, his name wasn't Shimon, his name was Zimri. He didn't want Zimri setting a precedent that could then lead all the people into confusion and into a very bad path. Because of his love for his people and his love for what they stood for, he acted with a great deal of zealousness and took care of the situation and, acted to stop what could have become a very terrible trend, which would have been another reason that we wouldn't have been able to then be worthy of the land, into the land. It would have been even more delays. So this is what we have for today about Eretz Yisrael, earning our right to Eretz Yisrael, overcoming all the stumbling blocks of doubt and confusion and immorality and lack of faith, buying into the culture of the place around us like they did in Mitzrayim. And the way to overcome that is faith in God and faith in his Torah and faith in our purpose. But I'd like to end with the Rebbe Nachman point, which I think is really so beautiful, is that even if we've stumbled and done all of those things, it's to wake up every morning in every moment and find that good point in ourselves that can say, even though I have done this, our people has done this, I've done that, I'm going to look for the good point. And as I reveal the good point, so I help to reveal the light in the darkness around me and help to bring redemption and geula. So l'chaim to that. I wish you hatzlacha Rabbah in our efforts to earn Eretz Yisrael, to live in a place where we reveal the qualities of Eretz Yisrael, doing Ratzon Hashem, making wherever we are into an Eretz Yisrael holdout or stronghold or space that looks like Eretz Yisrael, and that we should be zocher to enter into the real land as a people soon, B'ezrat Hashem, with Mashiach, before Mashiach, any which way we can. L'chaim, l'chaim, here's my water in the desert. And thanks for listening. Shalom.